Do you remember that slogan? Take back control. We heard it time and time again in 2016. We heard it in the general election of 2019. We've sort of heard it quite a lot ever since. But today, the new slogan from the new Home Secretary is, enough is enough. Yes, that's because the government took back control of the immigration policy and allowed it to go out of control. Completely out of control. So the Home Secretary now says, enough's enough, I'm going to take back control with the biggest ever reduction in immigration this country has ever seen. He's going to reduce it by some 300,000 people per annum. To which I'd politely remind him that back in 2019, they said they would get it below 200,000. So he's talking about a reduction 50% bigger than the maximum they were talking about as a government back in the first place. But that's okay. We all make mistakes. Let's just look at the detail of the government's new, latest plan. 5-point plan. The Prime Minister likes 5-point plans. Well, Mr. Cleverly's plan is he's going to stop health and care worker bringing dependents. He's going to increase the skilled workers earning threshold by a third, from about £26,000 up to £38,700 to bring it nearer to sort of the median full-time wage. He's going to scrap cut price labour by stopping the shortage occupation list that they created a couple of years ago, and that wouldn't be able to pay 20% less to bring in overseas workers. This was their scheme a couple of years ago. They're going to raise the family income for family visas, the minimum income to £38,700, and ensure that the Migration Advisory Committee's reviews the graduate immigration route to prevent abuse. Well, that all sounds very credible, Home Secretary. Thank you very much. When's it going to start, Home Secretary? To which the answer came, spring. It's now December. It's pretty chilly. I'm pretty sure the next month is January. Why, Home Secretary, isn't it going to start on the 1st of January? If it's enough is enough and it's a problem, why don't you get on with it? Why wait? So what do you think will happen between now and the spring? Which, of course, has a certain period of time to it, so it might be the end of spring. Do you think that maybe actually there's going to be a surge of people from all over the world who are going to say, watch out, the rules are changing, get your visa application in now, get it sorted, get in before the change? Yes, I think that's a fairly reasonable assumption, don't you? So we're going to have a surge, I suspect, between now and the spring. And I suspect that surge will be another 700,000 people getting visas to come and live in the UK. And what this report, his plan, his 5-point plan, maybe there weren't enough points to deal with the increase in student numbers that's almost trebled in the last 4 years from under 200,000 to 500,000 plus the dependents. So the student numbers will, in fact, they will grow. The masters numbers will grow. I'll be talking about that later in the week. You may remember 10 days ago I talked about some of the strange master's degrees and what's going on there. I've got some news for you later on that. The graduate visa doesn't seem to change. That's the back door way into the front door into the United Kingdom. That's not going to change, so that will go up. And there seems to be no change that I can see to the skilled worker list, which, by the way, has some 200 occupations with some 800 job titles. So there we are, folks. That's it. The new Home Secretary, enough is enough. He's asking you to trust him. So my question to you, quite reasonably, I think, is, do you trust the government to reduce net migration? That's the question. Do you trust the government to reduce net migration? Email me, farage@gbnews.com, or tweet #Farage on GB News. Well, obviously, an important part of net migration is the ability for skills and people to add value to the economy. So who better to join me now to discuss this plan and whether it's going to help or hinder or be a bit of each is one Jonathan Portis, who's the Professor of Economics at King's College London and, of course, a Senior Fellow at UK in a Changing Europe. Jonathan, thank you so much for joining me. A big announcement from the Home Secretary there today. You've probably just heard my sort of take on it, his 5-point plan, my questions and concerns about what it doesn't do and the timing of it. What are your thoughts, Jonathan? And what are you feeling from an economic perspective? Is that going to have an economic effect or what?
It will have some effect. Remember, the numbers were already coming down. They were lower in the most recent set of figures than in the previous figures. They showed a fall. And that's not surprising because a lot of the big bulge in net migration came first from refugees coming from Ukraine, Hong Kong, and to some extent Afghanistan, and then from, as you said, the ramp up in the number of international students, which of course was a sort of post-COVID, post-pandemic thing, and was part of the government's own strategy to fund universities. Basically, my university and other universities, we use the fees we get from international students to ensure that we can educate British students at less than what it costs us to teach them. So if you start upsetting that, you're basically saying to universities, you're not going to be able to educate British students because you won't have the money to do it. So there's some issues there. But overall, this will bring down numbers further. How much further, it's unclear. The biggest single change was this not allowing people who come here to work in social care to bring dependents. And I think you sort of have to ask yourself, do we as a country think it's fine to say to somebody who comes to work in an investment bank, sure, of course, you can bring your spouse and your kid, but somebody who comes to work in a care home, which of course we need to look after your parents or my parents, no, you can't bring your kid, you can't bring your spouse.
But it's like the question, Jonathan, about why do graduates need to bring dependents? And you've seen a huge increase in the number of dependents, up sevenfold, with students, as you say, international students. I mean, when I went to university, I didn't take my girlfriend up to the university when I did a degree.
Well, undergraduates can't, remember. We're talking about postgraduates here. But I agree. I think the case for looking at which types of students can bring dependents is pretty strong, and certainly a lot stronger than it is for care workers. And I don't think that the government has changed those rules somewhat, but I think that in itself is perfectly reasonable, actually. I think it's much harder to justify it for people in the care sector when we expect them to come and
I'm just picking up on that.
Years.
The thing is, though, we've got the biggest population, a record population the country's ever had. We've got a record number of people on out-of-work benefits, and yet we're constantly told we need to bring in more international labour in order to make our economy work, to which my simple point is...
Well, that's a bit of a... We've got a record number of people on out-of-work benefits. Actually, that's wrong. We had more people on out-of-work benefits in the 1990s, and considerably more as a proportion of our population, even though immigration was very low.
You think we had more than 5.2 million, 1 in 8 of the working age population?
Absolutely. Remember, I used to work for the Department of Work and Pensions. I know these numbers very well. I can promise you that it was higher in the early and mid-90s, and considerably higher.
If that's right, Jonathan, but we had net migration then of averaging about 100,000 a year, and our health and social care system was working rather well. So why now do we need net migration of 500, 600,000, and yet still we haven't got enough people in the health system? It doesn't compute to me. Actually, our health and social care system wasn't working particularly well in the mid-90s. A lot better than it is now.
No, you're right. You're absolutely right there. In the 2000s, when we invested in health and social care and put up spending a lot, some of it was wasted, but a lot of it wasn't. We did reduce waiting lists, and we didn't have the NHS, of course, has always had migrant workers, and it had some in the 2000s, but not nearly as many as now. And certainly, we didn't have this complete collapse in domestic recruitment in the care system. And there, the problem is very clear. The government has not invested in training, development, and pay for people in the care system. So, as a consequence, we are bringing in people from abroad, often on low wages, often treated very well. But I think the important thing to remember here is this is not the migration system causing low wages. This is the low wages causing migration, low wages that the government chooses to pay.
It's not the government paying low wages, it's big business who says we don't want to pay more wages, so we need more cheap international labour to depress British wages.
No, that's not really the case. Remember, the low wage, the health and social care sector.
But big business in the private sector is constantly saying, I need more cheap overseas labour in order to make the economy grow, but there's no economic growth, so it's flawed.
But wait a minute. The current system, outside the health and social care sector, the current system doesn't allow people to come in except at a skill level and salary threshold. That means they're not cheap, low-skilled labourers. You remember, in fact, what my research has shown is that actually the average earnings of migrants since we introduced the new post-Brexit system, which of course you supported very strongly for precisely this reason, since we did that, the earnings of the people who come on skilled work visas, the earnings of new migrant workers has been going up relative to the British population. These are not low-skilled, low-paid
But Jonathan,
workers.
On the skilled worker list, there's 200 job titles, of which the lowest is a seamstress at £16,000 a year, which is about half the annual wage. So I'm not buying any of that.
And do you know how many seamstresses come in through those visas compared to IT workers, university professionals, bankers, consultants? I can tell you because I've looked at the data, I've looked at the numbers. The people who are coming in.
But the net result is the numbers have gone up hugely, and yet we're told it buys economic growth, and yet we've got flatlining growth. So something doesn't compute, Jonathan.
Oh, well, there's certainly no doubt that there's lots of reasons we can talk about for flat growth. And migration is certainly not the one that most economists would pick. We could start with the after impact of austerity, move on to the impact of Brexit on trade and exports and so on, and continue with 20 years of underinvestment in railroads, public infrastructure and housing.
What, you mean wasting 50 billion quid on HS2?
Yeah. Well, that's an entirely different argument.
That is a different point. I hear all these arguments, Jonathan, but fundamentally the British people want growth in their wages, they want growth in the economy, we're not getting it, and we've got mass immigration. Something's not right.
Well, indeed. Let me read back to you something that somebody said to me when the post-Brexit immigration system was introduced, and after it had been introduced for a year. For millions of lower-paid Brits living in Britain receiving good pay rises thanks to Brexit stopping unlimited low-skilled migration. It's a very fine thing. Do you remember that?
I do remember that, but that's not what the government did. And remember, I'm not running the government. If I was, we would have controlled immigration, would have had higher wage growth.
That's what you said.
Absolutely.
A year after the new...
Yeah, but they opened the borders. I wanted to control the numbers, Jonathan. That's exactly the point. If they'd done what I said, we would have had that higher wage growth.
They did exactly what you said. That was a year after the system.
They didn't take back control, Jonathan. That's the whole point, and that's why they're now saying enough is enough. Jonathan, time is against us. We must get you back on because we've got a fascinating load of stuff to talk about. Thank you so much indeed. Jonathan Porter's there. Very good. He's checked up on what I said, but I stand by what I said. Take back control of the borders. You get higher wage growth for British workers. That's how we all feel better off.